I don't know why, but I can't hear the word photon without immediately thinking about Star Trek. I think that's a hint that I should start watching other things. This is one of those times where I ended up writing the review before writing this intro. That's not necessarily a bad thing, I just couldn't keep focus, and my friends kept sidetracking me with Civilization 6 as well as Destiny 2. What can I say? I have a video game problem as well as a Star Trek problem, apparently. That has nothing to do with this ink though, so let's talk about Colorverse Photon. If you want to see what goes into these mini bottles, check out my video on Colorverse Strelka. I go a little more into the contents and boxing in that video. For this video though, I kinda want to just jump right in, so let's do that. Looking at the ink blot, this color is really hard to pin down. The lightest portions are definitely a mid-saturated turquoise, but as you go into the mid-tones, this ink starts to fade over into teal territory. As the ink fades deeper into the mid and transition tones though, the turquoise is completely gone, and this is all teal, and unapologetically so. Also of note in those transition tones, what is a green underlayer becomes extremely prevalent, and a subtle sheen does start to come through. While this ink doesn't really dive bomb into black, it does shade very well, and I do like the end result. Before we see where the bold nib comes out in this ink blot though, let's take a look at the dry time. On Tomoe, it's a little bit of a letdown. Now, I know I'm using a broad nib here, but we've seen broad nibs dry much faster than the plus 30 seconds that Photon is showing. Over on Rhodia though, we are at least getting a manageable sub 20 second dry time. So if dry time is important to you, keep in mind that this ink is going to really depend on what paper that you pair it with. So how does this ink handle water? Well, as soon as we get water on the page, you can see a pretty good amount of color lift, and as you look through the water and onto the page, you can see that the line is not going to be as bold as what we saw on Coast Redwood. Once we get the water off the page, that is pretty much exactly what we get. It's not a bad ghosting layer, but there are some spots due to a faint line and good amount of color bleed that are going to be harder to recover than other portions. I'd honestly call this middle-of-the-road performance. So now that we've got the KPIs out of the way, how does this ink look on paper in a pseudo-normal scenario? Honestly, not bad. Though, I'm gonna be honest, once again, it does come down to what you are looking for in an ink and what paper you use. In my case, I tend to focus on color first, then weigh in the KPIs based on where I see this ink fitting into my daily routine. So when it comes to color, I do prefer this ink on Tomoe. You'll see here in a bit how the ink looks on Rhodia, but for me, TR seems to do a better job of bringing out those green undertones that help push this ink over into teal. With how many turquoise inks I already have in my collection, if this ink had been a flat turquoise, then it probably would have joined Strelka on the donation pile. As it is, I don't have many teal inks, and you can see here on TR that we are getting a nice dynamic range from the mids into those deeper transitions. Now, we aren't getting any of the sheen that we caught a glimpse of over on the ink blot, but we can honestly live without that. What matters most though is that this ink has good dynamics, good flow, and with me being a slow writer, the dry time really isn't a deal breaker. It does need to be better on TR though, and I don't know, I'll manage. What about Rhodia though? Well, I mean, this is kind of passable and in a pleasing way. We are getting just as much dynamic range, if not a touch more, and the line width is keeping up with TR. The ink is a tad more blue though over here on Rhodia, and I know it's a subtle difference, but it is a difference nonetheless, and in my case, not a positive one. This is what I was talking about with the paper playing a key role in the color of this ink. The properties of the paper cause certain wavelengths to be reflected at different intensities, so white really isn't pure white in this case. So an ink that is absorbed into each paper differently is going to reflect different wavelengths, and in this case, blue makes more of an appearance. Is it enough to fall into turquoise land? Well, that's a decision for you to make. It comes really close for me on that one though, and that was... Okay, that's a tangent, so let's circle back around to the important parts. Like you saw earlier, dry time over here on Rhodia is better, and flow, line width, and lubrication are really kind of the same. So if you're a Rhodia writer and like the color that you're seeing here along with the dry time from earlier, then yeah, this ink is a keeper for you. If you prefer the color over on TR though, just keep in mind that the dry time that comes along with the performance is not the best. And that's gonna do it for my look at Colorverse Photon. If you like the video or found it helpful, then hit that like button, get subscribed, and check out the links down below to pick up a bottle for yourself and support the channel over on Patreon. Until next video, don't drink the ink.